Welcome back, this is Aria, and today we're using particles and smoke to create this sci-fi scene. If this is helpful, please like and subscribe, and if you want to download the blend file for my original animation, you can sign up to become a member of my Patreon page. You will also be supporting me and helping me to keep the channel going. Okay, let's get started. First, I just want to point out that I am using the new version of Blender 2.91. First, hit A to select everything and then hit delete. Next, we're going to hit Shift A, Mesh, and we're going to add a circle. But before we click away, we just want to go down here and open up this little side menu, and instead of having 32 vertices, we're going to have 16. Awesome, so now we want to rotate our circles, so hit R, Y, and we'll type in 90 to rotate on the Y-axis. Next, we want to scale this, so S and 5 to scale. Then hit G, Z, and 6 to bring it up. Great, so now we're going to use this as our emitter, but what we want to do first is add particles to all of these vertex points, so let's head over to the particle properties, then click this plus. Let's change the number to 16, set both the start and end frame to 1, and set the lifetime to the length of our animation, which in this case is 250 frames. Next, we want to open the source tab here and change this from faces to vertices. Then we want to uncheck random order. This way our particles will show up on all of our vertices at the same time. Then set the velocity to 0. Scroll all the way down to the bottom here to the field weights, and since we don't want these to be affected by anything, we can just click here and set the effector collection to collection. Then once we create our other objects, we'll set them into new collections, and this will stay by itself. The very final thing that we want to do is take the gravity and set that to 0. So let's head back to frame 1. And now that we're done with our particle settings, we can just head over to the physics properties. Make sure again that we've got our circle selected. Click fluid, then we'll change the type to flow. Leave this to smoke and we'll set this to inflow so that we have a constant flow of smoke. Then we just want to open the flow source and change this from mesh to particle system. Click here and select our particle settings. Now we're done with that, we can just rename this emitter smoke just so that we know what it's for. We will be duplicating this a bit later on, so it's nice to know the difference between them. Now we can add our domain. Let's just zoom out a bit and hit Shift A, Mesh, and we'll select Cube. Then we just want to center this, so G, Z, and 6. We can just scale this up around our sphere, so S. Then hold Shift and hit X just to lock it to the Z and the Y. Then type 6. Let's just come around to the side and we're going to scale on the X, so S, X, and type in 2. Come back around to the front. Then in the physics properties, we'll click fluid and then set the type to domain. So let's set our divisions to 64. Scroll down and you can turn this on. But since our smoke is going to be flowing into the center, this won't make much of a difference since we've already sized it. Throw it on anyways, just in case it can save you a little bit of calculation time. We can turn on the dissolve and open this up, set this to 18. Click noise, open up this setting, and you can leave this to 2 if you want. I'm going to set mine to 3. I'm also going to set the strength to 0 just so that it doesn't create any fine details. So we're going to be creating some forces for our smoke, but we don't want them to affect our particles, so let's click the scene collection. Then click here to add a new collection, and we can just click our cube and drag and drop into the new collection. Now back in the physics properties, if we just scroll down a little bit further and open up our field weights, we can click here and select collection 2. Make sure to select collection 2. Just so that when we add our forces, they'll go inside of this collection instead of our other collection. Shift A, force field, and we're going to click force. Then since we want to bring everything to the center, we just want to bring this up, so G, Z, and 6. Over in the physics properties, we'll set the strength to -25 and the flow to 2. And you can see now that our smoke is being drawn into the center. So we just want to break that up a bit by adding some turbulence. Shift A, force field, and we're going to click turbulence. This one doesn't need to be centered, but I'm just going to bring it up anyway, so G, Z, and 6. Then just scale it up just so that it's a different size. Then again, just head over to the physics properties, and we're going to set the strength to 20, the size to 0.5, and the flow to 5. if I were to head back to frame 1, and you don't have to do this, I just want to show you, you can see that we are starting to get some effects here. But since our turbulence isn't moving anywhere, eventually these will just sort of straighten out and our turbulence will start to lose effect. So again, just back to frame 1, and what we can do is just animate our turbulence. So select the turbulence and hit I and set a location keyframe. Then drag your mouse to this corner, and when you see this little plus symbol, just click and drag. Then click here, Graph Editor. I also like to click this normalize button just so that all of our waves are in the center. Then open up the transform and you can click the X location. Hover your mouse here and hit N. Click Modifiers, and then we're just going to add a noise modifier. Set the scale to something around 15 and the strength to about 2. Then we want to do this for the other two as well, so let's just click here to copy. Click the Y location, then here to paste, and we'll just change the phase. Then one more time, select the Z location, paste, and change the phase. Great, so just right click and join these areas to remove that window. And we're finally ready to bake our animation. So the first thing I want to do is click on our particle emitter, and we're just going to bake this just so that we know nothing is going wrong. I know they're not doing anything, but sometimes it can get glitchy and these will go flying off, which will of course cause your smoke to calculate incorrectly. So just click the circle particles, and then we'll just go to the cache. Right before we click bake, we just want to hide our smoke emitter just so that it doesn't take long to bake. So head up to the top here and click. Let's just add our 2 render toggles. Then I'm just going to quickly rename this domain. Click this real-time toggle here, you can see that it goes away. If you were to try to bake these particles with that on, it's going to take about 10 times as long, so just turn that off to save yourself tons of time. Then select the circle one more time, back into the particles, and hit bake. Great, so now we can just turn our domain back on and select it. Then down to the physics properties, scroll all the way down and select here, and we're going to select all, and if you're using 2.83, just select final. Then make sure to save your file, and you'll probably notice that this is set to some kind of temporary folder, so just make sure to click here. Then just create a folder for the cache. This can be named anything, it doesn't really matter. You'll notice that mine was automatically created just because I previously saved my project. But of course you could save this to any folder on your computer, so just create a folder and then click accept. Save one more time and then hit bake. Great, so that only took a few minutes for me, so hopefully that didn't take too long. Now you can just scrub through and things are looking really good. So again, make sure that you're always saving just so that you're not losing any of your work. Now that we've got our smoke done, we want to create our particles traveling within our smoke, so select the circle, hold shift, hit D to duplicate, then just hit escape so it stays in place. Then up in the scene collections, you'll see that we have a new emitter. Click here and add a new collection. Then we just want to drag and drop this into our new collection, and we can rename this to particles. Then when you've got it selected, just make sure to remove the physics. So physics tab, then just X this fluid. Also just click on the particles and you can click this minus. We don't need to use our original smoke circle anymore, so let's just turn all of these off. Keep in mind that if you do need to rebake your smoke, you will need to turn these back on. Now select the new particle emitter and click the plus symbol. Feel free to change this to whatever you want, but I'm going to set mine to around 25,000. If you do have a slow computer, feel free to set this to something like 10,000, and that should work fine as well. Then we're going to set our start and end frames to match our animation and change the lifetime to around 125. Make sure to go into your source settings and change this to vertices. And in this case, you do want to have your random order on. Otherwise, you'll have particles emitting from these one at a time. So turn this to random and all of the vertices will emit particles at the same time. Then we just want to make sure that we set our velocity to 0. Down a little bit further, and for our render, we're going to change this from halo to object and change the scale randomness to 0.5. We need to create a particle object, so back in the 3D viewport, we'll hit Shift A, Mesh, and we'll click Icosphere. Leave this at default, except we're going to hit G and Z just to bring it out of the way of our simulation. You can see that it is in our main scene collection, so I'm just going to drag this and put it into collection 3 and rename it Particle. Then clicking back on the emitter, we can scroll all the way down again and click here and select Particle. Let's move down just a little bit further, and we want to make sure that we select this and change this to collection 3, just so that our particles aren't being affected by either of these forces. Then just make sure to set the gravity to 0. Now if I go back to frame 1 and hit play, you'll see that nothing really happens, but we've got little particles on all of our vertex points. So what we need to do is add one more force, so Shift A, force field, and we're going to add a fluid flow. This time I'm just going to leave this down here because it really doesn't matter the position of this. But I do want to again make sure that I drag and drop this into collection 3. Click the fluid force, then head over to the physics properties, change the strength to 4 and the flow to 2. Then the most important thing is we need to select our domain object, so you can either just click here and select domain, or you could just use the eyedropper as well. Then one more time, just head back to frame 1 and hit play. Awesome, so it's looking really good, but you'll notice on mine I did have a center, and once these particles go inside the center, we don't really need to calculate them anymore. So just before we bake our particles, we can head back to frame 1, Shift A, mesh, then click cube, hold Control and hit 3 to add subdivisions, then head over to the modifiers and you can just apply those. Right click, shade smooth, G, Z, and 6. Finally, let's just scale this, so S and 2. I added a bit of displacement to mine, so in the modifiers tab, click here and select displace, click new, then we'll click here to show in the texture tab, or you could just click here. Then instead of image or movie, we're going to click clouds, and everything default should be fine. So now we can just go back into the modifiers, set this to something like 0.25, click here and add a subdivision surface just to smooth it out, and set these to 2. Right click and shade smooth. Then just so that we can destroy our particles, once they reach this, we can go over to the physics properties, collision, and we can click kill particles. Again, make sure to save. You can rename this if you want. If you want to make this texture moving, you could add a new empty and add some animation to it. Then you would just click here, click object, and select the empty. In this case, I'm actually just going to select the turbulence because we do have some motion already animated, so I'm just going to use that. Then you can click on the particles one more time, head back to the particles, head down to the cache settings, and hit bake. Now that that's done, you can just hit play, or you can sort of scrub through and just see how things are looking. And yeah, things are looking really good, so hopefully you're at this same point. Now the only thing we need to do is add a few more geometries, materials, and lighting. So let's just quickly add the rest of our geometry, starting with our ground. So Shift A, mesh, and we'll add a plane. Then hit S to scale and type in 15. Zoom out, and we just want to scale this on the X as well, so S, X, and we'll type in 3. Bring this back by hitting G and X, and we can just drag our mouse. Next we can hit Shift A and select cube, then just zoom in, and we're going to scale this around our plane, so S and Z, and we can just drag our mouse in just until it's a bit wider than our plane. Scale on the Y, so S, Y, and we can just drag this until it's a little bit wider. Let's move around to the side here, and we just want to scale it on the X. If you hit N on the keyboard and click the mesh, you can see that our X is 45. So we can click the cube and type in something like 47, just so that we make sure that it's bigger, and then hit G, X, and we can just bring this over till it's about the same as our mesh. You can see it's a little bit long, but it doesn't really matter since we're more focused on the front. Click back on the cube, hit tab to go into edit mode. Then we don't want to go overboard with this because we do want to add the wireframe modifiers. Control R and click, hit escape just so it leaves it in the center, and then we want to set this to something around 50. Then Control R again, escape, and set the number of cuts to 25. Now we can hit tab to go back into edit mode, head over to the modifiers tab, click here, and we're going to select wireframe. That's pretty much it. I also subdivided mine, but keep in mind that this is pretty heavy, so I'm just going to leave it this way just for this tutorial. Next we can hit Shift A, mesh, and we're going to add a cylinder. Hit S to scale and type in 1.5, then S, Z, and 1.2. Then we just want to bring this up and over. Just before we subdivide this, let's add a bit more geometry, so tab to go into edit mode, Control R, and then just make sure you add a loop cut at the top and the bottom. Click here, hit I, and just add some geometry on the top as well. You can see that this is slightly underneath the ground, so what you can do is turn on the X-ray toggle and just select all of these. Then we'll turn it back off, hit G, Z, and we can just bring this up. Turn the X-ray toggle on once more, hit the decimal key just so that we can orbit specifically around our cylinder. Then Alt-click this bottom eye and drag just to add some more geometry on the bottom as well. And then that's it. Tab to go back into object mode. Right-click Shade Smooth, and then we can add a subdivision surface of 2. Next, we want to add some more of these, so click here and add an array. Then we can change the count to 5 and change the X factor to -6. Then one more time, array. This time we're going to use our Y. Then set this around 8.9. So Shift A, mesh, and we'll add a torus. We just want to set our minor radius to 0.02. Hit R, Y, and type in 90, G, Z, and 6, S, and 5. To add the spirals, just a quick add-on, so edit, preferences, add-ons, and then search for extra and make sure that this is selected. Also, this isn't part of the tutorial, but this adds some cool options as well. Then when you hit Shift A and go to curve, you'll see a lot more options. Head down to curve spirals and click this one. I just added a bit of radius growth to mine, say about 1, and made sure to add more turns as well. You can hit Tab to head back into object mode, and we can just bring this up just so that we can see what we're doing. Let's rotate this RY90. Then we can just head over to the curve settings over here. Open up the geometry. Under the bevel settings, we can set this to 0.03. Right click, convert to mesh, then modifiers, and subdivision surface. I've been adding everything to my other collection, so I'm just going to select the last few things that I added and drag them up into our main collection. Then we can just rename these if you need to. So for the spiral, then we just want to bring this back. So GX, then S to scale. And this will mainly depend on your camera, so what you can do is add a camera, so Shift A, camera, then you just want to set yourself up in front of your animation, hold Control Alt and hit 0 on your numpad. Then once you've got your view set up, you can now scale this down and bring it into the viewport. Again, I'm just going to drag the camera up into the collection here and then just make sure I select that. Once you've got that set in place, we're going to do the same thing, add an array, so click array, set the factor X to 0, and then we can just set the Y to something like 3.3. And then for the 2 in the back, what I did was I actually just duplicated this. So Shift D, and then we can just hit X to bring this back. Then just bring this up and scale it down. And there it is. So now we've got all of our geometries, and the last thing we need to do is to start shading. So head into the shading tab, and I'm just going to close these just so that it is easier to see. Then what I'll do is just sort of quickly go through these textures, but I am going to start with the HDRI. So click here and let's go into the world properties. If you head up here on the right and select the world properties here, click this dot and you can add an environment texture. Then click open. If you've been following my tutorials before, you'll probably have this HDRI already, but if not, grab it from the link in the description and click open. You can see now that we've got this little setup in our world shading. Click here, Shift D to duplicate, then Shift A to search for Mix Shader. Click this into here and we'll bring this to the bottom. We can turn on our render preview just so that we can kind of see what we're doing. And in this case, we want to use our HDRI for the lighting, and then we're going to create a different texture for our background. So the way we split those up is hit Shift A and type in light. Select light path, then just make sure that you select this first option here and hook it into the factor. Now you can see that our HDRI is doing the lighting, but if we head over to the render properties, open up the film settings and uncheck transparent, you can see we've got a gray background, which is this here. So let's do a couple changes here. First of all, we're going to change the strength to 0.5, then hit Shift A to add a color ramp. Hook the color into color, then we just want to swap these two here so that our dark value is on the right side. Select this little handle here, click, and we're going to make this a very dark blue to something like that. And then the final thing I did just to get that texture was hit Shift A, search for Voronoi, click, then we want to hook the distance into the factor, change this to f2, set the scale to 250, and the randomness to 0. Now if we hit 0 to go into our camera view, you can see I'll turn off the overlays and you can see we've got this cool texture in the background. Great, so now that we've got our basic lighting set up, we can just click here to go out of our world properties and go back into object and start adding our materials. So you can of course see that we don't have any smoke right now, so let's start with our domain by clicking here, then click new. So let's just delete that, Shift A, and we're going to search for volume and select principled volume. Make sure as well that you hook this into the volume and not the surface. Set the color to something yellow, density to 5. Next we're going to set the emission strength to 25, and you can see right away that we've created this big block of emission, which is not what we want, so we need to isolate this to only a specific area. First we're going to add a color ramp, so Shift A, color ramp, hook the color into the emission color. Then we're going to bring our dark value all the way over. Select this one and we're going to change this to a orangey red color. Shift A again and we're going to search for math. Change this from add to power and then hook this up. So quickly let's just change the exponent to 0.8. Shift A and we're going to add another Voronoi texture and hook the distance into the base. Set the scale to 2. Then the very final thing we're going to do is isolate this. So Shift A. And we're going to search for volume info. Then super easy, we just need to take the density and hook it up to the vector. And now you see that's looking super blocky. So the way to fix that is just go to the render properties under EEVEE, then open up the volumetric properties. And if you're able, set this to 2, but if not, set it at least to 4. But I'm going to set mine to 2 for this tutorial. And now you see that we're using the Voronoi to create these little twirls inside our smoke. And then what I did just to make this pop a little bit more was just add a couple more nodes. So again, Shift A, search for emission, set the strength to 50, and then we're just going to take the color and hook it up to the color. Shift A to add a mix shader, then place this here and connect the emission. Then one final node, Shift A, type in layer, select layer weight, and then we're just going to use the Fresnel to isolate our emission just to the edges of our simulation. And that's it. Select the ground and we're just going to do a super basic material, so click new and we'll change the metallic to 0.5. Next we can select one of our pillars, new, then we're just going to bring the roughness down a little bit and we can just bring the metallic up as well, just to get a little bit of a shine. Click on the spirals and add the same materials, so click here and select material 2. Same thing for the ring, just select the ring and you can click here and select material 2. I did change this slightly from mine, so what you can do is just click copy, then Shift A, mix, Shift A again, search for emission. We're going to set the value all the way up to 150 and select a red or orange color. Then Shift A, layer weight, using the Fresnel again into the factor and change the blend to 0.1. Then you can see it is looking a little flat, so you can hit Shift A, color ramp, and add this in between, type in 0.03. And now you can see that we've just got a little bit of a rim light happening. Next we can click on our center, and this is pretty much the same as the material we just used, so I'm going to select material 3, but I'm going to change the strength to 500 and bring the metallic all the way down. Select this and make it a little bit more red just so that it matches the color of our flames. Click this little plus symbol just to add in a new slider, and we just want to change this to something gray just so that we've got a little bit more of a fall off. And these values can be pretty sensitive, so just make sure that you play with them. I've got this one set to 0.01 and these ones aren't as important. Use the center one just to kind of fade between them. Then what I did for mine was I just quickly animated it. So down on the left here, click, and we can just bring up a new window and select timeline. So just head to about frame 40. Select the light value here, right click and insert a keyframe. And you can do the same for this value as well. Then if we head back to frame 20, now if you select these and select it all the way to dark value, right click and insert a keyframe for both of these. now you'll see that if I hit play, it slowly starts to animate in, so you can tweak this to your liking, but that's the basic setup. And then the final thing we want to do is just add a material to our center, so just make sure that you click the ground in the center, click new. We are going to be using a couple of the nodes from the last material, so I'm going to click here and click material 3. Then I want to make a copy, just so that when we edit this, it won't edit the other material. We can select this little slider here and hit minus, and just bring these values all the way out. As well, you want to right click here and clear. Then instead of having a layer weight, we're going to hit delete, shift A, and we're going to search for Musgrave and hook it up. Then set the scale to 15, detail to 25. And then what I did to make this move was just click here. If you've got the Node Wrangler add-on, hold Control, hit T to add in a texture coordinate and mapping node. If not, you can just search for both of those. Then head back to frame 1. You can see that if we use our X location, we can move our texture. So on frame 1, we're just going to right click and insert a single keyframe. Then click this to go all the way to the end of our simulation and type in 1.5. Right click and insert a single keyframe. If you select the ground, we can just quickly click here and go into the graph editor. Hit A to select everything, hit T, and I'm going to set this to linear. Then click here and select shader editor again. That way our texture won't start slow and end slow, it'll just be one constant movement. If you do want to change any of this, you can do that since it is procedural if you want to make this maybe a bit thicker. I'm just going to hit 0 to go into the camera view and turn off the overlays, and you can see that everything is looking really good. Just make a few changes, so you can click on the doors here and just hit S to scale and just bring this out just so that we make sure our smoke is all within inside of it. Select our particle, click new, and again we're just going to use a modified version of material 3, so select that. Since we want to make a new material, let's click here to copy. I'm just going to remove the color ramp, so hit delete and we can just reconnect our Fresnel, change the blend to 0.05, and then we'll just change the strength of the emission to 1500. Click the base color to add a yellow-orange color, set the metallic all the way to 1, and then just bring the roughness down. That's it. So now that we've used our particle, we don't need to see it anymore. So if I just scroll down to the bottom here, I'm going to turn on the viewport and render filters and just turn both of those off for the particle. But make sure that you do leave the real time on. So Shift A, light probe, and you can click reflection cube map. Click here and we're going to set this to box. Then you just want to scale this to fit your scene. I'm just going to hit 0 just to head back into the camera view. Head over to the render tab and now we can just start adding some EEVEE settings. So make sure to add ambient occlusion. You can add a bit of bloom as well, but make sure that you bring it down to somewhere around 0.006 just so that it's not blowing out the scene. Then finally we get to indirect lighting. We can open that up and just click bake. Awesome, so I'm just going to head back into the layout tab and turn back on the render preview and turn off my overlays. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please support me by liking and subscribing. If you want to get my original animation file, head over to my Patreon page and become a member. See you next week. Bye!